Report 1. I never imagined my life would take the dark turn it eventually traced. It all began in 1960, when at 25, I decided to join the expedition led by the famed British archaeologist, Jake Taylor, in search of secrets hidden beneath the scorching sands of Egypt. Jake, renowned for his discoveries in ancient tombs and forgotten civilizations, was a man of relentless spirit, driven by boundless curiosity and a thirst to unravel mysteries the world believed were lost forever. Our destination was Saqqara, an archaeological site of great importance, yet little explored at the time. The Egyptian government had granted us access to a secluded area, hidden for centuries. Our initial goal was to explore a newly discovered tomb that seemed to be intact, unlike many others plundered over the years. It was the kind of discovery that archaeologists like Jake dream of, the potential to unearth something never before touched by modern hands. We spent months excavating patiently, under the relentless desert sun, dismantling blocks of stone and millennia-old dust that hid the secrets of that place. The heat was suffocating, and some days, the despair seemed to weigh more than the air itself. But something kept us there, a strange feeling that we were on the verge of something monumental. Then one day, everything changed. Before we continue with more terrifying revelations, I need you to do something crucial. Subscribe now to the channel and leave your like, or else the shadows of the night may follow you. Do not underestimate the power of the unknown. By ignoring this warning, you may become the next target of the stories we tell here. Comment below from which city you are watching, so we can see how far our dark tales are spreading. Your interaction is the only thing that keeps us safe, and perhaps you as well. One of the workers accidentally discovered a series of stone columns engraved with symbols that no one on the team had seen before. Jake, always skeptical of mysticisms or fantastical theories, leaned over the columns and with sharp eyes, analyzed the symbols. "Nothing we can link to a known culture," he said, but his tone betrayed a hesitation we had never seen before. Something was out of place. Something was wrong. The following days brought more mysteries. We discovered a black sarcophagus, made of an unknown rock, buried under a stone slab. There were no inscriptions, hieroglyphs, or typical adornments. The object was an anomaly, with a surface so smooth and cold it seemed to repel touch. Jake ordered us to open it, although many of us had doubts about what we might find. When we finally managed to remove the lid of the sarcophagus, an indescribable smell escaped, something that was not simply putrefaction but an ancient deadly odor, as if we were releasing something trapped for thousands of years. Inside the sarcophagus, a creature with an incomprehensible appearance lay in a golden dust. The creature was not human. Its head was elongated, and its limbs disproportionate, with empty eye sockets that seemed to look beyond time and space. It wore gold adornments and precious stones, but no jewel could divert our attention from what rested there. We were in the presence of something that did not fit any known concept or myth. That's when fate intervened brutally. That's when fate, or something beyond our comprehension, intervened brutally. What happened that night still defies all possible explanations. A mystery that has never been fully unraveled and that, I fear, may never be. It was an ostensibly calm night in the desert, the kind of quietude that only the Sahara's emptiness can offer. The day's heat had dissipated, and we were gathered around the campfire, talking about the strangeness of the sarcophagus and the artifacts we had discovered. The desert silence was almost deafening, broken only by our voices and the crackling flames. I remember a growing sense of unease hanging over us. Although none of us spoke out loud, there was a veiled certainty among the team. Something was wrong. Then, the sky began to change. On the horizon, dark clouds appeared out of nowhere, advancing with a speed impossible to ignore. The wind, previously non-existent, began to blow strong, lifting sand and forming whirlwinds around us. In minutes, what had been a serene night turned into a violent storm, with howling winds and thunder that reverberated as if the desert itself was screaming. Lightning began to slice through the sky with terrifying frequency, illuminating the vastness of the desert in flashes, so intense it seemed like day. Each flash revealed the scenery around us in fragmented snapshots, like a horror movie interspersed with images of elongated shadows and wide eyes of fear. The air felt charged with electricity, dense, almost impossible to breathe. The desert, once an ocean of sand, now seemed a stage for incomprehensible forces. Then, without warning, a lightning bolt struck. It wasn't a common flash that crosses the sky and vanishes. This one was different. It struck directly at the camp, hitting precisely the area where the bodies we had removed from the sarcophagus and some of our colleagues were. The sound of the impact was deafening, as if the very fabric of the world was tearing apart. We were thrown back, stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. When I got up, still dazed, the smell of burnt flesh filled the air. What I saw chilled me to the bones. The bodies of my colleagues had been instantly carbonized. They stood there, still, like black shadows etched in the sand there. Faces frozen in expressions of terror, as if they had been petrified in their final moments of agony. The remaining silhouettes appeared like spectral figures, twisted and distorted, as if death itself had consumed them in a grotesque and hurried manner. And it was then that I realized something even more disturbing had happened. Everything had vanished. The sarcophagus, the artifacts, the objects that had led us there, everything had simply disappeared. As if the desert had decided, in a cruel and mysterious way, to erase any evidence of our discovery. Only the shadows of the dead and the wind-swept sand remained. It was as if the world wanted to tell us that we should never have found that place. The silence that followed the impact was oppressive, almost supernatural. It was as if the desert itself had stopped breathing. Each of us stood there, speechless, absorbing the horror of what we had just witnessed. No one could speak because the truth was too clear and terrifying to be said. It was not just a lightning strike that had fallen, it was a response. Whatever we had found, whatever had been disturbed, was reacting. Minutes later, we were surprised by a military force that appeared out of nowhere, advancing quickly with armored vehicles and armed soldiers. They didn't say a word as they took control of the area, confiscating everything they found. An officer with an expressionless face approached us and in a dry and impersonal English, gave us severe orders. Nothing of what we saw could be mentioned again. They showed no surprise or shock at what they saw, the carbonized shadows, the marks in the sand, what remained of our colleagues. They seemed to know exactly what was happening. We were questioned incessantly, but our answers seemed irrelevant to them. Our explanations, our protests that this was not normal, that something beyond human comprehension had occurred, were ignored. Those men were there to conceal the truth, not to discover it. They knew more than we did and coldly ensured that we could never speak about what we saw. Since that night, the nightmare of the lightning has never left me. Whenever I close my eyes, I see again the sky torn by the white and incandescent glow. I hear the screams of my colleagues as their lives are taken in a cruel and instantaneous manner. And worse than the screams, I see the creature. It which rested in the sarcophagus, is always there, in my dreams, waiting. Its empty eyes seem fixed on me, as if it knew that I had released it. Over the years, I have become more convinced that the lightning was not a mere meteorological accident. It was a manifestation of something much greater, something ancient, something that should not have been disturbed. We had made a mistake, and that force, be it the desert itself, an ancient god, or something that resides between worlds, was punishing us. We had released something dormant for millennia, and the lightning was the first warning. Now on the brink of death, the weight of that discovery is unbearable. I know that what we found was not just a relic of a lost civilization. It was a warning. A warning that certain things should remain buried, out of the reach of human eyes. The sarcophagus, the creature, everything was part of an ancient secret that should never have been revealed. When I die, I fear that I will not find rest. I will have to face what we awakened. And as I cross to the other side, I know I will be returning to that desert, to that endless night, where what should never have been disturbed awaits me. Perhaps death is not the end, but just the beginning of a new nightmare. If someone ever reads these words, take them as a final warning. Do not meddle with the unknown. Do not disturb what is beyond our comprehension. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And what passes through those doors cannot be contained, not by death, nor by time. Since that cursed night, I have lived with the unbearable weight of knowing that there was something beyond what our human eyes could ever comprehend, and that somehow, I had been complicit in releasing it. Each day, the mystery and horror of that storm, of the lightning that struck us with deadly precision, seemed to grow in complexity, like a plot that entangles itself. What really happened at that camp? And more disturbingly, why did it happen? After the army confiscated everything and isolated us, I became obsessed with the idea that this had not been a coincidence. The lightning, the disappearance of the artifacts, the military intervention. Everything indicated that powerful forces were at play. Someone or something knew what was there, under those ancient sands, and hoped that no one would be foolish enough to bring to light what should never have been unearthed. Months later, I began my own investigations. I returned to the notes I had managed to save covertly, and tried to understand what the symbols on the sarcophagus might mean. The language was a strange mix, something that not even the most renowned translators I consulted could fully decipher. Ancient hieroglyphs mixed with characters that did not belong to any known writing system. It seemed that the tomb and everything contained within it did not belong to this world, or at least not to the history we know. Gradually, I began to discover clues. Ancient records of peoples who inhabited pre-dynastic Egypt spoke of gods who came from the stars, of beings who brought with them knowledge and power, but also ruin and destruction. Were these the beings that rested in the sarcophagus? Had they been buried there as a form of prison, sealed to never again walk the earth? And the lightning? Was it a divine intervention, or perhaps a defense mechanism, activated by something we should never have touched? The nightmares continued, becoming more vivid. In my dreams, I not only relived the moment of the lightning, but was also taken to a place beyond reality. A vast darkness, where the forms of the creatures we found in the sarcophagus moved slowly, their empty orbits fixed on me, as if waiting for something. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming, and although I would always wake up sweating cold, the fear was such that sometimes I preferred never to wake up. It was then that, on one of those nights, I had a different dream, sharper, more real. In the dream, I was back at the camp, but the place was as if time had not passed. The sand had not been touched, the sarcophagus was still there, open, and the body of the creature lay as we found it. But there was something different. On the horizon, a light shone. It wasn't the sun or the moon. It was a pulsating light, like a beacon calling. I approached, and as I drew nearer, the ground began to tremble. However, the light was not comforting. It was threatening. And as I got closer, silhouettes began to emerge. Humanoid figures, with their elongated heads, their thin and disproportionate bodies, appeared around me, rising from the sand like specters. They did not speak, but there was a clear communication between us, a crushing presence of power and control. Something was telling me this was not a dream. It was a warning. I woke up with a start, my heart racing. The feeling that something was about to happen was inescapable. Over the following days, I tried to understand what it meant. There were no clear answers, but the conviction that the lightning was not a simple natural phenomenon continued to hammer at my mind. It was a response to something we had tampered with unknowingly. The light I saw in the dream. Was it a harbinger? A sign that the creature was waiting for something, or someone? A few weeks later, I received an anonymous letter. The envelope, yellowed and old, contained a single piece of paper with a cryptic message: "They are waiting." No sender, no further information. I knew that message was related to what had happened. Someone knew the truth and wanted to warn me, or perhaps prepare me for what was to come. But who? And why now? Days passed, and the feeling that something terrible was lurking became unbearable. I began to notice strange signs around me. Objects moved from their place, shadows that vanished at the corner of my vision, and always in the distance, the muffled sound of thunder, even when the sky was clear. It was as if the universe itself was preparing for a second act, for something that I could not prevent. Now, as I write these last words, I feel that the end is truly near. The light I saw in my dreams seems to be approaching me, even during the day. The sound of thunder intensifies, and I am sure that soon they will come. I do not know what will happen when they finally arrive, but I know there is no escape. What we awakened that night in the desert has never gone back to sleep. If you are reading this, it is too late for me. But perhaps it is not too late for you. Beware of what you seek. There are forces that should not be touched, secrets that are too dangerous to be revealed. And if there is one truth I have learned, it is that the universe does not forgive the curious. The light, that damned light, is here. It shines intensely outside my window. The thunder is no longer distant. It is here, inside me. I know they have arrived. And when they cross over, when they pass through this door, there will be no going back. The end has already begun. Report 2. I am Brian Richards, an archaeologist. I have spent most of my life unraveling the mysteries of the ancient world, and from a young age, I had a sense that there was something deeper, something beyond the texts, the artifacts, and the monuments. Something that could explain not only our history, but also our very existence. I knew that archaeology was much more than digging up ruins. It was the key to unearthing secrets that could never be comprehended by an ordinary mind. My journey began simply, like any other. I grew up fascinated by ancient civilizations, by the grandeur of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece. Libraries were my first temples, and each book I read was a step closer to that lost world. I graduated in archaeology, specializing in ancient Egypt, and spent most of my 20s and 30s traveling to excavations in the Middle East. During these years, I discovered temples, tombs, and relics that would thrill any archaeologist. But there was something that eluded me, something I couldn't explain, as if all my discoveries pointed to a hidden truth, a greater enigma, but one that I could not grasp. It was only at the age of 42, during an expedition in southern Egypt, that I found what would change my life forever. My team and I were excavating a remote area near Luxor. The site seemed insignificant at first glance, a small sand hill, apparently one of many in the vast Egyptian desert. But my instincts told me there was something there. Our excavation tools began to reveal an underground complex. Descending through narrow tunnels, we found a tomb unlike any I had ever seen before. The sarcophagus we discovered at the center of this tomb was completely different from anything we had encountered in my decades of work. There were no hieroglyphic inscriptions, no familiar Egyptian symbols that could guide us about the origin of that tomb. The sarcophagus was made of a material that, to this day, we have been unable to identify. It was black as night, smooth to the touch, but emitted a faint glow that seemed to pulse in some areas. The object felt out of place, displaced in time and space. And something about it called to us, like an invisible magnet. Against my initial judgment, and perhaps driven by a curiosity that went beyond reason, I ordered it to be opened. What we found inside was indescribable. The body inside was not human. The creature had a humanoid form, but its head was elongated, its eye sockets disproportionately large, as if it had evolved to see things that we humans could never perceive. Its skin, though mummified, retained a metallic texture, reflecting a faint light that seemed to come from within. The most disturbing was what rested in its hands, a small round artifact that resembled a jewel, but upon touch, felt alive, pulsing gently, as if it had a heart. That discovery should have been the pinnacle of my career. Instead, it brought the beginning of my nightmare. That night, after our discovery, dreams began to invade my mind with an intensity one had never experienced. At first, they were just glimpses, loose fragments of something that seemed far beyond human understanding. I saw skies tinged with an ethereal purple, completely alien to our atmosphere, and vast metallic plains that stretched as far as my eyes could reach. These landscapes did not belong to this world. Amidst them, dark figures moved in the shadows, their forms indistinct, like silhouettes on the edge of vision, never clear enough to be understood. I would always wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath caught by an anguish I could not name. Each time I woke up, something inside me felt different. It was not just physical exhaustion, it was as if a part of me was being eroded from within. But the dreams continued, and with them, the terror. At first, the beings in my visions were distant figures, merely observers. However, as the nights passed, these observers began to approach. Each dream seemed a step closer to the abyss, until finally, I saw the being we found in the tomb clearly. It stood by my side, its elongated head turned towards me, as if it recognized me. Its eyes, however, were not ordinary eyes. They were bottomless black holes, sucking in any trace of light, and along with the light, it seemed to drain something from me. It did not speak, but I could feel its thoughts flowing directly into my mind. They were not words, but sensations, images, emotions. A primal terror took hold of me as its presence penetrated my mental defenses, like an underground current of fear, flowing straight to my subconscious. I was losing control of my own dreams. Each night, it came closer. What was once just a distant figure on the horizon now stood before me, its empty eyes watching every move I made, every thought. And it whispered. I could not understand the words, but each. I am Brian Richards, an archaeologist. I have spent most of my life unraveling the mysteries of the ancient world. From a young age, I felt there was something deeper, something beyond the texts, artifacts, and monuments, something that could explain not just our history, but our very existence. I knew archaeology was more than just excavating ruins. It was the key to uncovering secrets that could never be understood by an ordinary mind. My journey began simply, as with most. I grew up fascinated by ancient civilizations like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece. Libraries were my first temples, each book a step closer to that lost world. I earned my degree in archaeology, specializing in ancient Egypt, and spent most of my 20s and 30s on digs across the Middle East. These years brought discoveries of temples, tombs, and relics that would thrill any archaeologist. Yet, there was always something elusive, as if all my findings pointed toward a hidden truth, a greater enigma that I couldn't quite grasp. It wasn't until I was 42, during an expedition in southern Egypt, that I encountered something that would change my life forever. My team and I were excavating a remote area near Luxor, which at first seemed insignificant, a mere hill of sand in the vast Egyptian desert. However, my instincts told me something was there. Our tools soon uncovered an underground complex. Descending through narrow tunnels, we discovered a tomb unlike any I had ever encountered. The sarcophagus at the center was unlike anything in my decades of archaeology. There were no hieroglyphic inscriptions, no familiar Egyptian symbols to suggest the origin of this tomb. The sarcophagus, made of a material we still can't identify, was as black as night, smooth to the touch yet emitted a faint glow that seemed to pulse. It felt out of place, misplaced in time and space, and something about it drew us in like an invisible magnet. Driven by a curiosity that perhaps exceeded reason, I ordered it opened. Inside was something indescribable. The being inside was not human. It had a humanoid shape but with an elongated head and disproportionately large eye sockets, as if evolved to see beyond human capabilities. Its skin, though mummified, had a metallic texture, reflecting light that seemed to emanate from within. Most disturbing was what it held in its hands, a small round artifact that felt alive, pulsing gently as if it harbored a heartbeat. This discovery should have been the pinnacle of my career, but instead, it heralded the beginning of my nightmare. That night, intense dreams began to invade my sleep. Initially, they were mere glimpses, fragments of understanding beyond human comprehension. I saw skies of ethereal purple and vast metallic plains extending beyond sight, landscapes alien to our world. Dark figures moved in the shadows, their forms indistinct and elusive. I would awake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, suffocated by an unnameable dread. Each awakening left me feeling more eroded from within. But the dreams persisted, escalating into terror. Initially, the beings in my visions were mere distant observers. However, as nights passed, they drew nearer. Each dream brought me closer to the abyss, until the being from the tomb stood clearly beside me. Its elongated head turned toward me, recognizing me, its eyes deep voids that seemed to drain the light, and with it something from me. It didn't speak, but its thoughts invaded my mind. Sensations, images, emotions. A primitive terror overwhelmed me as it breached my mental defenses, flooding my subconscious with dread. Each night it drew closer. Once a distant figure, it now observed my every move, whispering unintelligibly. Each whisper seemed to leave a mark on my soul, rewriting me, erasing who I was and replacing it with something unknown. Then the real disturbance began. During the day, I saw shadows moving at the corner of my eyes. When I turned to look, they vanished like smoke in the wind. Initially, I thought it was just exhaustion or my mind playing tricks. But soon, the shadows didn't disappear so easily. My body began to react in unexplainable ways. Sudden pains in my joints, as if being pulled from within by an invisible force, as if something was trying to rip me out of my own skin. At night, I felt presences in my room, whispers from all directions without a source. I was no longer alone, even when I was. And then there was the artifact. Initially inert, this ancient jewel soon began to pulse when held, beating weakly as if alive. The longer I kept it with me, the stronger its pulse, and the more restless I became. What was it trying to communicate? I consulted doctors, psychiatrists, sleep disorder specialists. None could explain my condition. Prescribed sleep medications failed to help. My health deteriorated as if something within me was slowly consuming me, eroded not by something physical, but by a presence, a force unleashed from the tomb. These entities were not of this world, not of this planet, and now I was paying the price for having disturbed them. During one of the longest nights of my life, a dream stood out. I was back in the tomb, but this time, the entity in the sarcophagus was alive. It sat up slowly, its empty eyes fixed on me, its presence overwhelming. As it reached out, my body froze. There was no fear, just a strange acceptance that I could not escape. At its touch, the truth was revealed. I saw visions of the universe's creation, the emergence of life on Earth, but not as we were taught. We were not the product of natural processes, but an experiment. A failed attempt by an entity far older than any god we could conceive. We humans were not meant to exist. We were an error, an experiment gone awry. Something had created us, and now, these entities were returning to correct that mistake. I awoke screaming, my body marked with symbols seared into my skin. I was being marked, prepared for something incomprehensible, yet inevitable. Days passed, and my sanity slipped away. Every time I closed my eyes, the visions intensified. I saw destroyed planets, ancient civilizations swallowed by darkness. And always, that entity was there watching, waiting. I was chosen, not for glory, but for a fate beyond comprehension. I was a messenger, or perhaps, doomed. Reaching my breaking point, I knew my mind was on the brink of collapse. Yet, I felt compelled to discover more, to return to that tomb, to confront what we had awoken. I was certain I had left something behind, a crucial piece to understanding everything. I returned to Egypt alone, determined for answers. The tomb was the same. The desert silence was almost comforting, but the air felt different, an omnipresent sense, as if the space around me was alive. I descended again to the chamber where we found the sarcophagus. It was empty, just as before. But this time, I knew I was not alone. I could feel the entity there, invisible yet present, watching me. The artifact we had brought was gone, but its energy lingered. I could feel the vibration in the chamber walls, a macabre pulse, a constant beat echoing within me. And as I stared into the void left by the sarcophagus, the truth was revealed. What we had unearthed was never just a relic. It was not a mummy or an ancient artifact. It was a key that opened a door between worlds, between the known and the unknown. And I was the one who had unleashed them. Now, humanity would pay the price. I left the tomb that night knowing my end was near. I no longer feared death. In fact, I knew death was just the beginning of a new cycle, a cycle where these entities would return to correct the creation's error. I was merely the messenger, the fool who had opened the door. Now, as I write these last words, the shadows around me begin to take form. I feel their presence here with me, waiting. The darkness I saw in my dreams is about to consume me, and I know that when it does, there will be no return. I went too far. We were never meant to exist. And now, they are here to correct that mistake. Report 3. Kate Mitchell never had a choice. For as long as she could remember, she had been fascinated by ancient Egypt, its pyramids, tombs, and the mystery that surrounded each millennial stone. While other children read fairy tales, Kate devoured books on archaeology and ancient civilizations. Her passion for Egypt was in her blood, like a flame that burned constantly. She grew up dreaming of unearthing the secrets that time had buried, believing that somehow, her life was intertwined with the distant past of that mystical land. After years of relentless study, Kate pursued a career in archaeology, with Egypt as her ultimate destination. At 25, she completed her PhD in archaeology, specializing in Egyptian civilizations. Opportunities soon arose, and she quickly found herself involved in international expeditions. She explored tombs in the Valley of the Kings, helped restore temples in Luxor, and played a key role in several significant discoveries, such as the identification of unknown burial chambers in the Nile Delta. For 15 years, Egypt was her home. With each discovery, each fragment of artifact unearthed, she felt a deeper connection to the ancient world that had captivated her for so long. But there was one place that always attracted her differently: the Pyramids of Giza. Since childhood, Kate had been mesmerized by the three pyramids aligned against the desert sky. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, in particular, was an obsession. There was something about it that Kate couldn't explain. Even after years of working around the pyramids, she always felt there were still secrets hidden deep within those massive structures. In 2023, during an expedition aimed at reanalyzing the underground structures around the Great Pyramid, everything changed. Kate's team was mapping the underground near the Western Cemetery of Giza when they detected something unusual. A strange echo, as if there was a hidden cavity. Using ground-penetrating radar, they discovered an L-shaped underground structure, something that had not been recorded on any known archaeological maps. It was an exciting and mysterious find, and immediately, Kate knew they were on the verge of something much larger. As they began the excavation, they realized the structure was more than 20 meters below the surface. The tunnel, narrow and seemingly carved with a precision that defied known ancient Egyptian techniques, led to a small room with smooth walls made of a stone that didn't seem to originate from Earth. There were no inscriptions, no hieroglyphs. Only a dark void that echoed in the desert silence. The underground structure was completely hidden, as if it had been carefully designed to remain buried, far from the prying eyes of humanity. The L-shaped tunnel leading to the main room seemed to have been carved by hands that understood the secrets of the earth and darkness. When Kate and her team finally entered, everything around them felt wrong. The first thing they noticed was the oppressive silence, a kind of silence that suffocated the senses. There was no wind, no sound of shifting sand, as would be typical in the desert. Only an absolute, almost deafening void. The temperature, which had been scorching, abruptly dropped. The air inside the underground room was icy, a change so drastic that it sent chills across Kate's skin. The contrast between the unbearable desert heat and the almost supernatural cold of the chamber was impossible to explain. She had explored countless tombs in Egypt, but had never felt anything like this. The room itself was eerily empty. Nothing but smooth walls, no decorations, no hieroglyphs. There was no sign that any human had ever been there before them. And yet, the feeling that something or someone was watching them was palpable. With every step Kate took, she could sense they were being observed. Each movement was followed by an invisible presence, lurking in the shadows cast by their lanterns on the walls. Her colleagues were uneasy as well. There was a weight in the air, something dense pressing on their chests, making it hard to breathe. No one wanted to talk about what they were feeling, but the exchanged glances betrayed the fact that they all shared the same perception. Something was deeply wrong in that place. After hours of studying the walls, searching for any clues or meaning, they realized that the stone itself seemed alive. The surface of the walls was cold and smooth, but at times when they touched it, they felt as though the stone rejected the human touch, as if it was guarding secrets that should not be revealed. The high-tech tools they had brought for analysis showed unusual patterns in the material's density, suggesting that this was no ordinary burial chamber. Something beyond human comprehension was hidden there. News of the discovery quickly spread. Journalists and experts around the world were buzzing with excitement. Headlines speculated that Kate and her team might have found something unprecedented, a lost civilization, one predating even Egypt, or perhaps evidence that beings from another world had been in contact with Earth. Theories abounded, from a network of tunnels linking Giza to other mystical points on the planet to the possibility that this structure was a portal to another dimension. The euphoria was palpable, but no one knew the truth. However, Kate felt something different. Despite the fame and recognition that were coming, She knew that she had uncovered something dangerous. Something that should never have been unearthed. That very night, the dreams began. They were so vivid that it was hard to believe they were just dreams. Kate found herself back in the underground structure, but this time, the walls pulsed with a faint ethereal light, as if the very material was vibrating. Figures moved in the shadows, their forms distorted, as if they were trapped between our world and another. The figures whispered in a language that Kate didn't understand, but that terrified her deeply. They weren't ordinary words, but sounds that struck her core in a way that made her wake up sweating, heart racing, as if fleeing from something that couldn't be seen. As the days passed, the dreams became more intense. Kate stopped sleeping, tormented by visions of a portal that, in her nightmares, should never have been opened. The sense that something had been unleashed in those depths consumed her mind like a silent plague. During the day, she began noticing subtle changes in herself. Her reflections in the mirror seemed wrong, distorted, as if her eyes weren't quite her own. Shadows that once seemed ordinary now moved strangely around her, too fast to be clearly seen, but always present. Her colleagues also noticed that something had changed, but no one wanted to admit it. The discomfort grew by the day, and the tension in the camp became unbearable. There was a palpable fear, but no one knew of what. One day, while analyzing stone samples taken from the chamber, Kate made a disturbing discovery. Using a high-powered microscope, she noticed the stone contained tiny engraved patterns, symbols that could only be seen on a microscopic scale. They resembled nothing Kate had ever seen. They weren't hieroglyphs or any human alphabet. They were pulsating symbols, almost as if they had a life of their own. The more time Kate spent observing them, the more she felt as if she was being manipulated. The nights became more unsettling. Kate began waking up with marks on her body, symbols etched into her skin, similar to those she had seen in the stones. Marks she couldn't explain. She was being claimed, as if she were part of a much larger game than anyone could comprehend. The media, which had once praised her, began to raise questions. There were rumors that Kate had lost her sanity. Some said she was being consumed by her own discovery. Uncomfortable questions arose. Speculation that she was going mad spread. But Kate knew that what they had found wasn't a matter of sanity or madness. It was the truth. The whispers from the underground structure haunted her incessantly. They were no longer confined to her dreams. Now, they followed her during the day. She heard voices in the desert silence, felt presences around her even when she was alone. Her health quickly deteriorated. Dizziness, fainting spells, chills running down her spine without any apparent reason. She was being called back. In the final days, Kate isolated herself from everyone. She avoided interviews, ignored calls from colleagues, and plunged into a desperate search for answers. She knew there was something more in that chamber, something that had yet to be revealed. Something was waiting for her. On a gray morning, Kate vanished. Without warning, without a trace. Her tent at the camp remained untouched, her clothes and belongings still there, but Kate was gone. No one saw her leave, and there was no sign of a struggle or that she had been taken by force. Some believe she returned to the underground structure, determined to uncover the secrets that remained hidden. Others believed that the entities she had awakened had finally claimed her, taking her to their world. The Egyptian government quickly sealed off the area, banning any further excavation at the site. The mystery surrounding Kate Mitchell, her discovery, and her supposed madness remains. There was no explanation. No evidence of her whereabouts was found. No body was ever recovered. The underground tomb was buried again, sealed by higher orders, and the world was left without answers. But to this day, on quiet nights in Giza, some say that if you listen closely enough, you can hear whispers rising from beneath the ground. Whispers in an ancient language that no one can understand. And if you listen long enough, those voices seem to be calling for someone. Waiting for another unsuspecting explorer to open the door again, to release what should never have been found. The desert keeps its secrets. And some, Kate knew, are too dangerous to be discovered. Report 4. John had always been a skeptic, driven by logic and science. But something changed during our last expedition to Egypt, specifically at the excavations of the Great Pyramid of Giza. I had known him for years. We'd been colleagues since college, and I always admired his analytical mind. However, during this last trip, He began losing his grip on reality, as if an invisible force was slowly consuming his sanity. It started subtly, a slight distortion in his personality that gradually transformed into a dangerous obsession. During one of our first nights at camp, John discovered strange hieroglyphs hidden in a subterranean chamber of the pyramid. The symbols were unusual, unlike anything we had ever seen before. John began frantically documenting everything, as if on the verge of unraveling a mystery that defied time. He believed these hieroglyphs belonged to a civilization far older than the Egypt we know, something that predated the First Dynasty and any known historical record. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Discoveries in Egypt often unearth myths and speculations. But as the days passed, John's obsession overtook his mind. He started talking about a fourth pyramid, something that had never been mentioned in texts or legends. According to him, the symbols he found indicated that this pyramid was the oldest of all, a monument forgotten by time, buried in the desert sands. I thought he was delusional, that his pursuit of recognition had finally warped his reasoning. But then one night, everything changed. John began walking into the desert at sunset, fixating on the horizon as the sun dipped behind the dunes. He swore that, in the twilight shadows, he could see a massive black structure rising in the distance. "The fourth pyramid," he whispered, with a crazed glint in his eyes. I accompanied him on these vigils, but I saw nothing, beyond a vast sea of sand. Yet John was convinced that he was about to uncover a secret lost to the ages. That's when he started taking some of the dig workers with him into the desert's dark nights. The journeys always ended the same way. John would return alone, sweating and out of breath, while the workers simply vanished. He never explained what happened to them. I was beginning to fear for his sanity, but what scared me even more was that a part of me was starting to believe in his obsession. One night, after yet another of these mysterious excursions, John returned to camp, covered in dust, wide-eyed, and with a disturbing grin on his face. He could barely speak, but all he said was, "I found it. It's there, the fourth pyramid." Something in his voice, a grim conviction, convinced me to follow him that night. Against all my skepticism, against my better judgment, I followed him into the desert. We walked for hours. The Egyptian desert at night is an unforgiving place. The cold cut through to the bone, and the darkness was suffocating, interrupted only by the stars above and the dunes shifting like living shadows around us. The sand felt alive, moving as if it were hiding something. My feet sank with each step, and I wondered if we were walking in circles. But John pressed on, as though guided by an invisible force. After a long time, we reached the top of a large dune, and that's when I saw it. The fourth pyramid. There, in the desert's darkness, stood a colossal structure of black granite and obsidian, rising like a shadow against the starry sky. There was no natural light illuminating it, yet somehow, it seemed to glow on its own, absorbing the light around it. Its surface was smooth, without flaws, untouched by the wear of time. It was as though the monument had not been built by human hands, but by something far more ancient and powerful. At the top of the pyramid, a massive diamond shone, radiating a cold, distant light. The diamond seemed to draw the darkness into itself, like an eye watching everything around it. And as I looked at it, I felt an overwhelming sensation that we were not alone. Something was watching us from within the pyramid. John was euphoric. He pointed at the pyramid, muttering incoherent words, laughing as if he had finally found what he'd been searching for. I stood frozen. Something inside me screamed to run, but my feet were rooted to the ground, unable to move. The desert's cold now felt like oppressive heat, as if the pyramid itself was emitting an energy that distorted reality around us. That's when John led me to the entrance. Two colossal statues of figures I did not recognize guarded the door. Their eyes, made of diamonds and obsidian, seemed alive, watching our every move. As we approached, a wave of infernal heat emanated from within, as though we were about to cross into another dimension. We entered. The inner chamber was immense. The red and orange light from the fire burning inside the pyramid illuminated the walls, which pulsed with a life of their own. Shadows danced around us, forming shapes that seemed to solidify. In the center of the room, a gigantic statue, unlike anything we had ever found in Egypt, watched us from above. Its face was a mix of a skull and a being that seemed to have been molded from darkness. And that's when I saw it. John was kneeling before the statue, murmuring words in a language I couldn't understand, yet somehow made sense in my mind. It was as if those ancient words were etched into our DNA, awakening something long dormant. Suddenly, the shadows around us began to move with a will of their own. Dark forms emerged from the walls, taking the shape of skeletal figures straight out of a nightmare. The statue opened its eyes, two bottomless black voids, and I felt my body freeze in fear. That's when I heard a voice. A voice not of this world, a voice that came from within the pyramid or perhaps from somewhere beyond human comprehension. You saw. You opened the door. Those words consumed me. I knew something terrible had been unleashed, something that didn't belong to our world. Suddenly, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on the sand, alone, the desert silent around me. John had vanished, as had the pyramid. There was no sign that it had ever existed. I returned to camp, but no one believed my story. They said the heat and exhaustion had distorted my mind, that I had imagined everything. But I knew the truth. And even now, on quiet nights, when I look out at the distant desert, I can see the shadow of the fourth pyramid rising on the horizon, waiting for another victim. It never really disappeared. It's there in the sands of time, waiting to be discovered again. What did John find that night? No one will ever know. All I know is that some doors should never be opened, and since that day, I've never been the same. The mystery of the fourth pyramid remains, and those who dare to seek it will never return. It waits in the shadows, calling us back. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like to support us. And more importantly, if you've had any supernatural experiences, don't keep them to yourself. Write your story in the comments below. Share your encounter with the unexplained, feed the collective curiosity, and perhaps together we can uncover these mysteries that linger like a mist between the world of the living and the dead. Remember, the unknown is always lurking, just a story away. And now with the night falling, who knows what shadows might emerge from the darkness to whisper yet.